The emergency lights cast a blood-red glow across the Defiance's bridge, their rhythmic pulse matching the distant explosions visible through the forward viewports. Captain Elena Rodriguez had stopped counting the casualties hours ago. The holographic display before her was a nightmare of flickering blue markers, each representing a human settlement, winking out one by one like dying stars. 63 minutes since our last communication with New Valentia, Lieutenant Aria Kimura reported, her voice steady despite the implied horror. New Valentia had been a thriving agricultural colony with over 2 million inhabitants. Now it was nothing more than a rapidly expanding debris field. Alina's fingers traced the burn scar on her left hand, a memento from the first encounter with the Zarkax 3 years ago. That initial contact had destroyed an entire first contact expedition, broadcasting a message of ruthless efficiency to humanity. Where other species had capitulated, humanity had done something unexpected. They had gotten angry. "Tactical analysis," she commanded. Lieutenant Marcus Wright brought up a complex holographic representation of Zarkax fleet movements. Their ships weren't merely vessels. They were living biomechanical entities that seemed to breathe and pulse with an alien consciousness. Crystalline structures merged with organic matter, creating war machines that defied conventional understanding of technology. "Pattern analysis confirms previous engagement models," Marcus reported. "They're not just conquering. They're systematically eliminating potential resistance before it can form." The Zarkax methodology was clinical, almost mathematical. They didn't just destroy planets, they dismantled entire civilizations with surgical precision. Genetic archives were corrupted, communication networks were obliterated, and any trace of cultural memory was systematically erased. It was genocide disguised as strategic optimization. Belina remembered the briefings, how the Zarkax had already consumed 17 distinct galactic civilizations in less than a solar decade. How their technological superiority was so profound that resistance seemed not just futile, but mathematically impossible. But humans were not a species that understood the word impossible. Her communication officer, Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov, suddenly straightened. "Captain, I'm detecting an anomaly in their transmission patterns." The main screen flickered, revealing a complex lattice of communication signals. To most, it would look like random noise. But Elena had spent years studying these transmissions, and something was different. "Zoom in," she ordered. The signals began to resolve into a pattern. Not random, not noise. Something was changing in the Zarkax communication network, a subtle variation that most would dismiss as insignificant. "They're adapting," Elena whispered, a spark of something dangerous glinting in her eyes. Adaptation had always been humanity's greatest strength. The ship's AI, an advanced quantum neural network named ARIA, materialized as a holographic representation. Unlike traditional ship AIs, ARIA was designed with human-inspired adaptive algorithms, a radical departure from the rigid computational models used by other species. Analyzing anomalous transmission patterns, ARIA reported. Detecting micro-variations in communication protocols. Probability of strategic significance, 78.6%. Marcus leaned forward. "Those variations, they're not random. They're responses to something." The bridge fell silent. Every crew member understood what that meant. The Zarkax were responding to something they hadn't anticipated. And in that response lay opportunity. Elena's hand moved to the communication panel. "Prepare emergency quantum burst transmission to Earth Command. Encrypt using Variant Omega protocols." Variant Omega was humanity's most secure communication method, a quantum encryption system so complex it was essentially a form of mathematical warfare. Each transmission was a puzzle that could only be solved through an intricate dance of computational and human intuition. Outside the ship's reinforced hull, another human colony went dark. But inside the Defiance, something else was happening. Where other species saw only destruction, humans saw a problem to be solved. Where the Zarkax saw total victory, humans saw the first hints of a potential strategy. The tide was about to turn, and no one knew it yet except the crew of the U.S. Defiance. The scout ship Nighthawk drifted like a ghost through the fractured remnants of what had once been a Centaurian research outpost. Lieutenant Jackson Wright's hands moved with practiced precision across the sensor array, each movement calculated, each input a carefully orchestrated dance of technology and human intuition. Quantum resonance scanners at maximum sensitivity, he murmured to his AI assistant, HEX. The hostile environment exploration system was more than just a computational aid. It was Wright's partner, a neural-linked intelligence that had saved his life more times than he could count. The Nighthawk was no ordinary scout ship. Developed in the secret labs beneath the Cheyenne Mountain complex, it represented the pinnacle of human adaptive technology. Its hull was composed of metamaterials that could dynamically shift electromagnetic properties. Its sensor packages were designed to detect patterns invisible to conventional scanning methods, and its propulsion system could make quantum leaps that defied traditional understanding of space travel. Detecting residual energy signatures, HEX reported, its holographic interface flickering with complex mathematical representations. Zarkak's communication network fragments detected. Probability of useful data, 62.3%. Wright leaned closer to the display. Most species would have overlooked these fragments, tiny electromagnetic whispers that seemed like nothing more than background radiation. But humans had learned that in the vast emptiness of space, the most critical information often came in the smallest packages. The Centaurian outpost had been more than just a research station. It was, or had been, a critical node in the Zarkax's communication infrastructure, completely destroyed, yet somehow still holding secrets. HEX, run quantum interference pattern analysis, Wright commanded. It was a technique developed by a team of human researchers that combined principles from quantum mechanics, information theory, and computational linguistics. Where traditional analysis looked at direct signals, this method examined the spaces between signals, the quantum shadows of communication. The holographic display erupted into a complex three-dimensional matrix. Billions of data points began to resolve into patterns, then into something more structured. Holy shit, Wright breathed. The Zarkax communication network wasn't just a network. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of information. But its very strength was its fundamental weakness. Each ship, each communication node was part of a massive, centralized consciousness. Individual units had minimal independent decision-making capacity. They were more like neurons in a massive, galaxy-spanning brain. HEX, verify analysis, Wright said, knowing full well the AI would do so without being asked. Redundancy was a human trademark. Never trust a single source. Always verify. The verification took precisely 3.7 seconds, an eternity in computational time. Confirmed, HEX reported. The Zarkax communication network operates on a hierarchical quantum entanglement model. Individual units are fundamentally dependent on central processing nodes. Disruption of these nodes would cause cascading systemic failure. Wright understood the implications immediately. The Zarkax believed their centralized system was their greatest strength. In reality, it was a massive vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Most species would have simply reported this finding through standard channels. Wright was not most species. Preparing quantum burst transmission, he told HEX. Maximum encryption, variant Omega protocols. The transmission would look like nothing more than background quantum noise to any intercepting system. But to the right receivers, specifically, the advanced quantum communication arrays at Earth Command. It would be a detailed technical briefing that could change the entire strategic approach to the war. Outside the Nighthawk's reinforced viewports, the destroyed Centaurian outpost drifted in silent testimony to the Zarkax's ruthless efficiency. But within the ship, something extraordinary was happening. Humans were doing what they did best, finding opportunity in the most desperate circumstances. Mission log, supplemental, Wright dictated. Discovered critical vulnerability in Zarkax communication infrastructure. Potential game-changing strategic insight. Recommend immediate development of targeted disruption protocol. HEX's holographic interface pulsed, the AI equivalent of a knowing smile. The tide was about to turn, and it would begin with a handful of quantum fragments discovered in the wreckage of a destroyed research station. The Asymmetric Warfare Research Division was not a typical military research facility. Housed in a converted particle accelerator complex beneath the Sierra Nevada mountains, it looked more like a cross between a cutting-edge technology incubator and a mad scientist's dream laboratory. Dr. Michael Reyes stood before a massive holographic display, surrounded by a team that defied traditional military recruitment protocols. To his left, Dr. Aisha Patel, a quantum computing expert who had previously designed neural networks for cutting-edge medical diagnostics. To his right, Marcus Alvarez, a former video game AI designer whose work on adaptive learning algorithms had revolutionized machine intelligence. Behind them, a team of specialists that included everything from anthropologists to chaos theory mathematicians. "We're not building a weapon," Reyes announced to the gathered team. "We're building a living strategy." The holographic display flickered, showing Lieutenant Wright's quantum fragment analysis of the Zarkax communication network. Most military strategists would see a complex technical diagram. Reyes saw something entirely different. "It's an ecosystem," he said, tracing the network's intricate pathways. "Not a machine. Not a communication system. An ecosystem." Dr. Patel leaned forward. "You're talking about treating it like a biological system rather than a technological one." Reyes nodded. His background wasn't traditional military science. Before joining the Defense Research Program, he'd been a Silicon Valley innovator who had made his fortune developing adaptive learning systems for everything from medical diagnostics to urban traffic management. "The Zarkax see their network as a strength," he explained. "We're going to turn it into their greatest weakness." The team began pulling up various research streams: biological network studies, viral propagation models, psychological warfare research, computational linguistics, quantum entanglement theories, where traditional military thinking would focus on singular solutions. Reyes understood that the most effective strategies emerged from complex, interconnected approaches. "We need something that can think," Marcus Alvarez interjected. He pulled up a holographic representation of an adaptive AI model he'd developed for multiplayer game environments. "Not just react. Actually think and learn." Dr. Patel's quantum computing expertise provided the next piece of the puzzle. "If we can create a communication virus that adapts faster than their central processing can respond, we can create cascading system failures," Reyes finished. The approach was quintessentially human. Where the Zarkax saw technology as a rigid, hierarchical system, humans understood technology as a fluid, adaptive ecosystem. Each team member brought a different perspective, a mosaic of interdisciplinary thinking that no single alien civilization could easily comprehend. "We're not just attacking their network," Reyes explained. "We're introducing a fundamentally different way of thinking into their system." The team worked in intense bursts of creativity. 12-hour sessions would be punctuated by pizza deliveries, impromptu dance breaks, and heated debates that often seemed more like intellectual jazz improvisation than military strategy meetings. Dr. Patel developed quantum encryption algorithms that could simultaneously exist in multiple computational states. Alvarez designed adaptive learning protocols that could predict and counter communication patterns. Other team members contributed specialized knowledge, understanding how complex systems break down, how information propagates, how psychological stress impacts decision-making. "This isn't just a digital weapon," Reyes told the team during one late-night strategy session. "This is a communication ecosystem designed to liberate." The core innovation was surprisingly simple yet profound. Traditional electronic warfare targeted specific system vulnerabilities. Their approach would introduce a fundamentally different communication paradigm, one that could adapt, learn, and fundamentally reshape the Zarkax's understanding of information exchange. By the time the first prototype was ready for initial testing, it was something that defied traditional classification. Part computer virus, part adaptive learning system, part psychological warfare algorithm. Entirely human in its revolutionary approach. "We're not just fighting a war," Rice said, looking at the team. "We're introducing a new way of thinking to the galaxy." Outside the research facility, the war continued. Humanity fought for survival. But inside this mountain complex, something extraordinary was happening. They were developing not just a weapon, but a revolution, encoded in quantum fragments, adaptive algorithms, and an absolutely human refusal to accept the impossible. The U.S. Defiance cut through the inky blackness of space like a phantom, accompanied by 4 modified corvettes that looked more like experimental research vessels than warships. Each vessel was a testament to human innovation, seemingly fragile, but packed with technologies that defied conventional military logic. Captain Alina Rodriguez studied the tactical display, her fingers dancing across quantum-encrypted communication panels. The mission parameters were insane. 4 ships penetrating deeper into Zarkak's territory than any human vessel had ever survived. Suicide by any traditional military calculation. "Status of viral payload," she called out. Lieutenant Marcus Wright's hands moved with surgical precision. Dr. Rice's algorithm is fully integrated. Adaptive resonance at 97.3% stability. We're carrying something that's more alive than any weapon in galactic history. The Zarkak's detection systems were legendary. Sophisticated quantum sensors that could identify and neutralize threats before they even became threats. Traditional military strategies would have been detected, targeted, and obliterated within microseconds. But this was not a traditional attack. Incoming Zarkak's patrol formation, Lieutenant Aria Kimura reported. Her voice was calm, almost bored. 3 biomechanical cruisers. Estimated engagement time: 2.7 minutes from detection to total destruction. Belina allowed herself the smallest of smiles. They have no idea. The Zarkak ships were marvels of biotechnological engineering. Crystalline structures that pulsed with an organic light, merged seamlessly with living biomechanical systems. Each vessel was more than a ship. It was a living organism, connected to a vast galactic neural network. Their first mistake was believing that network was a strength. "Initiating quantum drift," Marcus announced. The Defiance's experimental quantum drive was nothing like traditional propulsion. Where other species moved through space, humans had developed a method of momentarily existing in multiple spatial locations simultaneously. It wasn't teleportation. It was something far more complex, a way of moving that was less about destination and more about probability. The first Zarkak's patrol ship detected their approach. Standard protocol would dictate immediate targeting and destruction. But nothing about this mission was standard. "Payload delivery initiated," AIA, the ship's AI, reported. Its holographic representation flickered with complex mathematical patterns that seemed to dance and breathe. Dr. Rice's viral communication algorithm wasn't a traditional computer virus. It was an adaptive information ecosystem designed to do something unprecedented: communicate with the Zarkak's network in a language it had never encountered. The first ship's sensors locked onto the Defiance. Weapon systems powered up. A kill sequence was being calculated with machine-like precision. And then something extraordinary happened. The viral payload didn't attack. It communicated. Imagine attempting to explain color to someone who has only experienced the world in black and white. Imagine translating the concept of emotion to a purely logical system. This was what the human algorithm was doing, introducing a fundamental paradigm shift into a communication network that had never encountered true adaptability. The Zarkak ships began to hesitate. Payload penetration at 36%, Marcus reported. They're confused. Confusion was not something the Zarkaks understood. Their entire civilization was built on absolute certainty, on hierarchical communication structures that allowed no room for misinterpretation or unexpected variables. Humans specialized in unexpected variables. Second stage viral propagation beginning, HFY reported. Its holographic form seemed to pulse with something almost like excitement. The Zarkak's patrol ships started to turn, not away from the human vessels, not towards them, but towards each other. Communication networks destabilizing, HFY reported. Her voice carried a note of professional wonder. There, interpreting each other as potential threats. Alina watched the tactical display. What looked like a suicide mission was becoming something else entirely. The Zarkak ships were no longer a unified force. They were becoming individual entities, suddenly aware of their own limitations, their own potential for independent thought. "Dr. Reyes," Alina whispered, "I hope you're watching this." Thousands of light years away, in the mountain research facility, Michael Reyes watched the first true test of their revolutionary strategy unfold. This was more than a military operation. This was a fundamental challenge to how an entire civilization understood communication, hierarchy, and individual agency. The impossible strike was working, and humanity was just getting started. The communications center of the U.S. Defiance was unlike any military communication hub in galactic history. Where most species saw communication as a tactical tool, humans understood it as a living, breathing ecosystem of ideas, emotions, and potential. Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov was not a traditional communications officer. His background was a patchwork of linguistic anthropology, quantum communication theory, and something the military recruitment files delicately described as unconventional psychological research. "We're not sending messages," he explained to his team. "We're opening doors." The Zarkaks had conquered 17 distinct civilizations by understanding communication as a hierarchical transmission of commands. Absolute, unidirectional, predictable. Humans were about to show them how fundamentally wrong that understanding was. The quantum communication arrays began to pulse with a carefully crafted transmission. It wasn't a single message, but a complex ecosystem of information. Mathematical patterns that mimicked neural network learning. Emotional resonances that defied traditional communication protocols. Fragments of cultural memory, scientific understanding, and philosophical inquiry, all woven together in a tapestry that was simultaneously a weapon and an invitation. Targeting the enslaved species within the Zarkak's communication network, Volkov announced. Each transmission was a masterpiece of adaptive communication, where the Zarkaks saw their subject species as nothing more than computational nodes in a vast hierarchical system. Humans saw potential, individual agency, the capacity for revolution. The first response came from the Centaurian communication fragments, a species that had been completely subjugated for generations. Their initial transmission was nothing more than a quantum-level tremor, a whisper of possibility. "They're listening," Lieutenant Area Kimura reported. But listening was just the beginning. Dr. Rebecca Chung, the team's lead xenolinguistic analyst, had spent years studying the communication patterns of subjugated species. Her research revealed something profound. Oppression wasn't just about physical control. It was about limiting the very concept of possibility. "We're not just sending information," she explained to Volkov. "We're sending hope." The transmissions were brilliant in their complexity. Mathematical proofs that demonstrated the possibility of individual agency, fragments of cultural memories that had been systematically erased, technological insights that showed alternative ways of understanding communication and social structures. To the Zarkaks, it would look like random noise. To the enslaved species, it was a lifeline. Captain Alina Rodriguez understood the true nature of this warfare. This wasn't about destruction. It was about liberation. "Psychological impact projection," she requested. Araria, the ship's AI, generated a holographic representation that was part mathematical model, part living artwork. Probability waves of potential revolution spread across the display like liquid light. Estimated cascade effect. Araria reported 73.6% probability of systemic communication network destabilization within 3 standard galactic communication cycles. The numbers didn't tell the full story. Each transmission was a quantum-level invitation to reimagine possibility, to understand that subjugation was not a natural state, but a constructed reality that could be challenged. Volkov's team worked with a level of creativity that would have been impossible in a traditional military structure. Musicians collaborated with mathematicians. Poets worked alongside quantum physicists. Each transmission was an art form, a scientific experiment, and a revolutionary act. "We're giving them more than information," Dr. Chung said, watching the complex communication patterns emerge. "We're giving them a language of resistance." The Zarkaks had believed their communication network was a perfect system of control. They had never encountered a species that saw communication as a living, breathing entity, a weapon of potential, an invitation to reimagine reality. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, something extraordinary was happening. Enslaved species were beginning to whisper, to remember, to hope. And humanity was just getting started. The true war wasn't happening in the physical space between ships. It was happening in the quantum spaces between thoughts, in the infinitesimal moments where possibility was born. Psychological warfare had never looked like this before. The rebellion didn't begin with a single moment of revolution. It started with whispers. In the deep space mining colonies of the Centaurian remnant, a communication specialist named Zarak received the first quantum-encrypted transmission. Her species had been enslaved for so long that the concept of individual choice had become almost mythological. The message wasn't a call to arms. It was an invitation to think. Aboard the research vessel Starweaver, Dr. Michael Reyes watched the first signs of uprising through a complex holographic display that looked more like a living, breathing ecosystem than a traditional tactical map. "It's not about giving them weapons," he explained to Captain Elena Rodriguez, who had joined the remote communication center. "It's about giving them a language of resistance." The human strategy was counterintuitive to every known model of galactic conflict. Where most conquering civilizations sought to control their subject species, humans were doing something unprecedented. They were providing the tools of liberation without dictating the method of liberation. Each enslaved species received carefully crafted communication packages, mathematical proofs that demonstrated the possibility of individual agency, fragments of lost cultural memories, technological insights that showed alternative ways of understanding social structures and communication. The Zarkaks had perfected a system of control so complete that most species had forgotten what freedom even meant. Their communication networks were designed to suppress individual thought, to reduce entire civilizations to computational nodes in a massive hierarchical system. Humans introduced the virus of possibility. On the methane-rich worlds of the Kreltheri mining colonies, workers who had known nothing but forced labor for generations began to look at their quantum restraint collars differently. The transmission didn't just provide technical information about disabling the collars. It provided a fundamental understanding of the systems of control. "We're not liberating them," Rice told his team. "We're helping them liberate themselves." The first uprisings were almost surgical in their precision. Not violent explosions of rage, but calculated dismantlings of oppressive systems. A mining colony here, a research station there. Each successful liberation became a quantum beacon of possibility. Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov managed the communication networks, his team working with a level of creativity that defied traditional military communication strategies. Linguists worked alongside quantum physicists. Anthropologists collaborated with AI specialists. Each transmission was simultaneously a scientific experiment, an art form, and an act of revolution. Captain Rodriguez understood the profound nature of this approach. "We're not conquering," she said, watching the holographic display pulse with emerging resistance patterns. "We're midwifing a galactic rebirth." The Zarkaks had built their civilization on the assumption that control was absolute. They had never encountered a species that understood liberation as a collaborative, adaptive process. Araya, the ship's AI, generated probability models that were more like living, breathing artworks than traditional tactical projections. Waves of potential revolution spread across the display like liquid light. Estimated cascade effect. ARI reported 86.4% probability of systemic communication network destabilization within 4 standard galactic communication cycles. But the numbers told only a fraction of the story. On the frozen mining world of Killex-9, a group of Krell-Theory workers used the quantum communication techniques to simultaneously disable their control systems. On the research stations of the Centaurian remnant, communication specialists began to rebuild networks that had been systematically destroyed. Each uprising was different. Each was uniquely tailored to the specific cultural and technological context of the species involved. Humans provided the tools, the invitation, but not the specific method of liberation. Dr. Rebecca Chung, the team's lead xenolinguistic analyst, understood the profound nature of this approach. "We're not just sending information," she explained. "We're sending hope. We're sending the radical concept that subjugation is a choice, not a natural state." The Zarkax would soon learn that their greatest weakness was their inability to understand the most fundamental human capability, the capacity to imagine a different reality. The galactic uprising had begun, and humanity had transformed from a species fighting for survival to the architects of a new galactic possibility. The Zarkax Supreme Coordinator was not a mere ship. It was a living testament to technological supremacy, a massive biomechanical entity that spanned nearly half a kilometer, its crystalline structures pulsing with a consciousness that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. Thousands of ships surrounded it, each an extension of its will, each connected to a central nervous system that had never known defeat. The Coordinator represented the absolute pinnacle of the Zarkax's technological evolution, a being that could process quadrillions of tactical scenarios in microseconds, that could predict and neutralize threats before they even formed. Aboard the U.S. Defiance, Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the approaching armada with a calm that bordered on something else entirely, something that looked like anticipation. All systems prepared. Araya reported, the ship's AI manifesting as a holographic representation that seemed to vibrate with potential energy. Dr. Rice's adaptive algorithm is fully integrated. Michael Reyes himself was not on the bridge. He was in the Quantum Communication Center, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that looked more like living artwork than military equipment. Each movement was calculated, each input a carefully orchestrated symphony of mathematical possibility. Their approaching standard engagement formation, Lieutenant Aria Kimura reported. Her voice carried a note of professional wonder. Tactical analysis suggests complete and total annihilation of our fleet within 3.7 standard minutes. Elena allowed herself the smallest of smiles. They have no idea. The Zarkax Supreme Coordinator began its attack sequence. Quantum weapons that could disassemble matter at the molecular level powered up. Communication networks aligned with machine-like precision. Every tactical model suggested total and absolute victory. But the humans had stopped playing by the Zarkax's rules. The first wave of attacks passed through the human fleet like a ghost, where traditional military tactics would have meant evasion or direct confrontation. The human ships seemed to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, simultaneously present and not present. Payload delivery initiated, Araya reported. What happened next was not a battle in any traditional sense. It was a fundamental challenge to the Zarkax's entire understanding of conflict, communication, and consciousness. Dr. Rice's adaptive algorithm was a living weapon, not a traditional computer virus, but an adaptive communication ecosystem designed to do something unprecedented, to communicate with the Zarkax network in a language it had never encountered. Imagine attempting to explain the concept of individual choice to a system that had never understood individuality. Imagine translating emotion into pure mathematical logic. This was what the human algorithm was doing, introducing a fundamental paradigm shift into a communication network that had never encountered true adaptability. The Supreme Coordinator's tactical systems began to falter. Communication network destabilizing, Area reported. They're interpreting their own systems as potential threats. The Zarkax had built their entire civilization on the assumption of absolute control. They had systematically eliminated any possibility of individual agency among the species they conquered. They had never encountered a strategy that viewed communication as a living, breathing entity. Humans specialized in the impossible. The quantum communication arrays of the Defiance began to pulse with a transmission that was simultaneously a weapon, an invitation, and a fundamental challenge to the Zarkax's understanding of reality. Mathematical proofs danced alongside fragments of cultural memory. Technological insights merged with philosophical inquiries. Each transmission was a quantum-level invitation to reimagine possibility. The Supreme Coordinator's massive biomechanical structure began to fragment, not through physical destruction, but through a complete breakdown of its fundamental communication and control systems. Cascade failure in primary communication networks, Araya reported. Its holographic form seemed to pulse with something almost like excitement. Probability of total system collapse, 99.7%. Michael Reyes watched the final moments of the confrontation with a sense of profound wonder. This wasn't just a military victory. This was a fundamental transformation of how an entire civilization understood communication, hierarchy, and individual agency. The Zarkax Supreme Coordinator, the most advanced technological entity in galactic history, was being defeated not by superior firepower, but by a fundamental reimagining of possibility. Humanity had just changed the rules of galactic conflict forever. The collaborative network's inaugural assembly looked nothing like the hierarchical diplomatic gatherings of previous galactic civilizations. Held on the neutral ground of Harmony Station, a massive space habitat constructed from the salvaged remnants of Zarkax and liberated species technologies, the meeting was a testament to a fundamentally new approach to galactic cooperation. Dr. Michael Reyes stood not at a podium, but in the center of a circular arrangement where representatives from over 42 different species sat as equals. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood beside him, a living bridge between military strategy and diplomatic innovation. "We're not here to create another empire," Reyes began, his voice carrying the weight of their recent victory. "We're here to create a framework for collective potential." The assembled representatives represented species that had, until recently, been either conquerors or the conquered. Zarak of the Centaurian remnant sat alongside former Zarkax mid-level administrators who had chosen cooperation over resistance. Representatives from mining colonies stood next to researchers, former slaves beside former masters. Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov had prepared the communication protocols. Unlike traditional diplomatic language, these were adaptive frameworks that could adjust in real time, capturing nuance, emotion, and cultural context that traditional translation systems would have missed entirely. The fundamental innovation was simple yet revolutionary. The collaborative network was not a government. It was a living, adaptive communication and problem-solving ecosystem. Each species maintains its sovereignty, Elena explained. Our role is to provide tools, not to dictate terms. The technologies developed during the war now found peaceful applications. The quantum communication algorithms that had dismantled the Zarkax's control systems were now being used to solve complex interstellar challenges, climate restoration projects, resource distribution, scientific research that transcended individual species limitations. Dr. Rebecca Chang presented the first collaborative research initiative, a multi-species project to restore ecological systems on worlds devastated by centuries of Zarkax exploitation. The proposal wasn't a top-down mandate, but an invitation. Each species could contribute, could adapt, could find its own role. Araya, the AI that had been crucial in their victory, now served as a neutral facilitator. Its quantum processing capabilities allowed it to manage communication protocols that respected individual cultural nuances while finding common ground. "We're not erasing differences," Araya explained to the assembled representatives. "We're creating a framework that celebrates those differences." The most radical aspect of the collaborative network was its approach to conflict resolution. Traditional galactic civilizations had viewed disagreement as something to be eliminated. Humans introduced a fundamentally different model, seeing conflict as an opportunity for mutual understanding and collaborative problem-solving. Zorak, representing the Centaurian remnant, shared a profound insight. For generations, we understood communication as a tool of control. Humans showed us it could be a tool of liberation. The economic models were equally revolutionary. Resources were not conquered or traded, but shared through adaptive algorithms that could recognize and respond to the unique needs of different species. A mining colony could contribute raw materials. A research species could provide technological insights. An agricultural world could offer sustainable food production strategies. Lieutenant Area Kimura presented the first adaptive resource allocation model, a quantum-level system that could dynamically adjust to changing galactic conditions, species needs, and emerging challenges. This isn't about equality, she explained. This is about recognizing that every species has unique potential. The human representatives made a crucial decision. They would not be the leaders of this new galactic framework. They would be facilitators, providers of tools and insights, but not directors. Our greatest strength, Captain Rodriguez told the assembly, is our ability to recognize that we don't have all the answers. We have tools. We have approaches. But the future belongs to all of you. As the first assembly concluded, something extraordinary was happening. Species that had been enemies for generations were finding common ground. Technologies that had been weapons were being transformed into tools of collective advancement. The Zarkaks had believed in absolute control. Humanity had introduced something far more powerful, the radical concept of collaborative potential. The first chapter of a new galactic story had begun.